Hello, everybody. Mike Donahue here with Brian May. We have a special guest I'll be introducing in a minute, but welcome to the podcast, Groomed.Connect. We are here every week talking about all kinds of things, but basically, we are talking about spiritual abuse, and we have a great guest today. She is a best-selling author as of today or this week. She co-wrote a book
Yeah.
called Voices of Inspiration, and she's also a professor at San Jacinto. I think I'm saying that right. Jacinto
Yep.
College in Texas, and she's an amazing person. I've gotten to know her. I think I might have met her once, but we did not have a relationship back in the day. She is related, or she had a similar experience with the person that Brian and I have been talking about, a woman in ministry that is real popular in youth ministry. And this young lady, Lesley Butcher, was one of the a ghostwriter for this person and wrote some of the books. I'm going to let her get to it. But Lesley, welcome. I've been really looking forward to having you on this podcast since we've been talking the last couple of months. So go ahead and tell us about yourself and what's going on.
Yeah, I am so excited to be here. I think since I read your book, not to plug it just because you're here, but it brought back a lot of things. It's been 20 years since I stopped working for the person that you all also worked for and around. And I grew up in a small cornfield town, middle of nowhere, huge Celtics fan, even though I grew up 40 minutes from
One more
where
game,
Larry
baby.
Bird
One more
went to
game.
college. I know, I'm wearing my green. My dad was a pastor. My parents got saved in the 70s through a Methodist revival, believe it or not. And I always say they're a little spiritually schizophrenic, but we moved from church to church, and they built a really healthy foundation for us. But if you had Christian parents in the 80s and 90s, they were kind of the most Christian, and so we were sheltered in a lot of ways. And I'm stealing that from Nate Bargatze.
I love that. I love that.
One of the only channels we had was TBN, and they had repeated commercials for Oral Roberts University. And so I took a roundabout way there. I started at one school in a communication program I could play softball, and I was going to be a sports broadcaster. And then I ended up at Oral Roberts. And I loved it. One of the things I loved about it were chapel services and just incredible worship. I tell people today, like, the worship we had in college was unbelievable. Carrie Job was just a student there. A guy named Ryan Tedder, who now has a band called One Republic and has written for everybody on the planet, was just a student leading worship. And one day we had a female speaker, which wasn't common, and she was unbelievable. And I was getting a degree in communication. I was journaling my dreams of being a public speaker, of being an author, that I was just going to be this communicator. And I had nothing to go home to. My parents were pretty poor. And I just grew up in a big family without anything. And they were like, go and take care of yourself, and Jesus will help you. And so I was 500 miles from home and really just enamored with this idea of dreaming big and making whatever impact and really fulfilling this ultimate calling or destiny, knowing like I have these gifts, similar you write in the book about that thing that makes you come alive when you were helping kids and you thought, this is what I want to do. I did my first speech when I was 10, and I remember thinking, this is unbelievable. I want to do this forever. So this woman, you could have heard a pin drop. 5,000 students are just mesmerized by her. And I remember just kind of saying to myself, gosh, I want to meet her. And I ended up getting to know her son. And that was the beginning of about 3 or 4 years of what I didn't know would be working for free. It was sort of the...
we could have told you. Just call us.
And to be honest, there may be people who watch this podcast. They're like, I still will tell you that person is one of the greatest storytellers I've ever known, an incredible communicator. But I teach business communication. I teach public speaking, and I'll tell students often the difference between manipulating an audience and connecting with an audience is you. Yeah. Like it's your own integrity, it's your own morality, really your own ethics, and it's really on you. and I didn't know how I would get sucked into that fog. But her son and I became friends, and he said he was going through a really hard time, and he was taking a lot of the classes I had just completed. And so he said, "Would you help me with my papers?" And so I started writing papers for him, which is completely unethical. Uh, it's terrible. I wouldn't. I had already. I think he probably knew I'd already written a paper for a very famous televangelist daughter who they owned a jet, millions of dollars on the West Coast. I won't mention any names, but it got around that I would do just about anything for anyone. And I think at the time I thought, this is such a great connection, and whatever I can do to help him, it would be great. And I gave him a ride home, which was about 8 hours out of the way, and paid for his gas, like took care of everything, and stayed at his house, and saw his family was leaving a church that they had been at for 13 or 14 years. And I was there at the very last youth service at the end of 13 or 14 years. And I remember thinking, this is unbelievable. I've never seen anything like it. This has got to be, she's the best at what she does. And I think if you see someone in your field and you go, they're so good at what they do, I have so much to learn from them. And so I didn't end up meeting her until my senior year, and she said, "Do you have a job lined up?" And I was working 3 part-time jobs. I was editing for a law journal, waiting tables, taking care of an elderly lady. I was a research assistant for doctoral students. I actually probably had 5 jobs. I was a marketing intern. I was, by every definition, a hustler, and not in a bad way. I just worked nonstop. And she talked to me and said, my other son actually has written kind of a manuscript, and it's not great. And I hate that I'm saying this, but it's been 20 years. So she was like, just rewrite it. We won't tell anybody. And you can add things to it that you think would be great. So I got all these ideas. I spent probably 150 hours interviewing like televangelist kids, we had all these extra things that we put into the book, and then he was going to get a book deal. We weren't going to tell anybody that I did it, but I spent an exorbitant amount of time. And what I would find out, probably not realize till later, is that was sort of a pseudo job interview. Like, what would this girl do for free?
Right. And Lesley, let's be clear.
Yeah.
Ghostwriting is not immoral or wrong, but
No.
usually they pay for it. Like if you're gonna ghostwrite,
yes,
you
and
pay.
I started by just rewriting, and what's crazy is, in my marketing internship, she said, "This is I'm going to say this. I probably never said this out loud, but I've told a story my entire life. I even did like an NPR event and told this story, but that when I was 19, I had this vision that people were standing on a cliff, and they wanted to get to another cliff, and I was going to use my communication degrees to help them get there." And that was the picture that I had felt like the Lord had given me, and I was going to do my best to make that happen.
So this kind of fell right into that. So it felt like, hey, this might be the opportunity.
Oh, I had told that story to her son. And so then in the car, she looks at me and says, "I don't know if this will make any sense to you, but it's as if I'm standing on a cliff and there's a book with my name on it on another cliff. And I've been approached by publishers. I don't have time to write. I need somebody." And when I went to my marketing internship, this is the goodness of God. The sweet photography, our head of photography made a phone call and said, "Can you be in front of your dorm tonight at 7 p.m.?" And I said, "I'll make it work." And this very large white Cadillac and very large woman pulls up, rolls her window down, says, "Are you Lesley?" And I said, "Yeah." I get in. She takes me to a Mexican restaurant. She slides her business card across the table. She says, "I've ghostwritten over 300 books." So she was Oral Roberts' personal ghostwriter. She was Charles Stanley's personal ghostwriter. I mean, you name it. She's like, "I've made all the lists." And so she said, "What do you want to know?"
Wow.
And so one of the things that she said to me in that meeting that I've carried forever is that what speaks well doesn't read well, and they'll never understand. And that speaking and writing are 2 different parts of your brain that you have to use. And so, and what reads well doesn't actually speak well from a stage. And so I just took that as confirmation. She said, "I don't know what I can promise you." And then eventually she said, "Okay, I can pay you, this is 2002, I can pay you $20,000 a year and I'll cover your housing and you'll come, we're moving to California. You'll come work there. I had no idea what I was getting into. I just felt like I'm taking a leap of faith. This is clearly what God wants me to do. I had a suitcase and a box. That's it. And I flew for the second time in my life at 22 to Sacramento, California. And when I hit the ground, it was a tornado like nothing I had ever experienced in my entire life. So the first few months she said she would cover housing. So this is what that looked like. I was sleeping in an attic, an unair conditioned attic in June in California
In California.
with another girl I'd never met. And pretty quickly I made a comment about how it was warm, like and difficult to sleep. And it was in a rougher part of town. Some single mom had an attic. Somebody had pitched it. I don't know who they got. I probably met that lady once. And, and I was told very quickly that I needed to be grateful for that $20,000. I was getting paid more than anyone else. I would find out later, maybe not as much as her kids, but more than anyone else. And that I needed to be grateful for that. And so within a short period of time, I thought I did what this lady who was a ghostwriter, she said, get all the audio resources, get an idea. I was Googling how to do book proposals. So I immersed myself thinking, this is what I'm going to do. And she asked me to help with marketing. Of course, I traveled with her some, ran a merch table, ironed her clothes, organized her closet till 2 a.m., just a lot of things. And was put in charge of a small group really quickly at the church. So these 9th and 10th graders, 20 of them got assigned to me. I was just handed a list with phone numbers and said, you're going to love these people into the kingdom and you'll do whatever it takes to get them to come to church. And then I was sat down and said, we actually need a secretary. This youth department's going to be so big that we need a secretary. So what I quickly learned was the $20,000 I was promised was now going to be paid by this very large church. And I would do data entry. I would answer phones. I would make copies.
Yeah, they have expectations for you as
Right.
an
I was
administrative
a
person.
full-time secretary.
Right.
Right.
So
And,
before we move on to quickly, I just want to ask you a question. When you made a legitimate observation that your accommodations were less than ideal, and you were told that you need to be grateful, what did that feel like that first time that happened to you?
I think I'm such a people pleaser, and I was just the good kid. My identity from the time I was little was like, I don't mess up. And I didn't grow up in a nice house. Like we didn't have a lot. My parents probably still haven't turned the air conditioning on in Southern Illinois. But so it stunned me and it made me feel like I'm not good. Like, oh shoot. Like, that's not who I am. I'm so sorry. I'll do better. Does that make sense?
Yes.
You blamed yourself. You put it on you.
Yeah.
They're right.
For sure. Like,
Yeah.
what am I thinking? Obviously, I mean,
Right.
yeah, it's California, and I got moved to another house. I was sharing a bathroom, I think, with a 13-year-old boy. Later, I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. I had a letter was supposed to go out. So an email was supposed to go out to all the parents of every teenager at the church. So she drafted the letter. Then I made edits. We would go back and forth. And so after a round, I had corrected or made edits and then sent it out. But I didn't send it back to her again for a second or third review. I can't remember.
Yikes.
And I got raked over the coals for just berated. Like I literally did it. I wasn't in fight or flight. I was just in freeze, like just numb. Like I can't believe. And it was just such a benign email. It wasn't like that important. It probably was something asking for money, but I panicked so much. But in the middle, at the end of the berating, I was staying with a new family. And this was maybe 4 or 5 months in. And she said, and by the way, they're ready to kick you out. Like they're done. They can't. And I went to the family and said, I'm so sorry. And they they had said, like, we don't want you to clean the bathroom. I'm sharing it with our 13-year-old kid. We want him to clean the bathroom. So I didn't clean it, but I was like, I'm happy to clean it. Just felt like a weird dynamic because
Right.
I'm a 22-year-old living with a family, which is a little awkward in and of itself. And then I said, I'm so sorry if there's something I'm doing that's upsetting you. And they said, we think you're overworked and we're worried about you and you come in late and we don't want you to do that. And I remember going, I'm a secretary 40 hours a week. I'm doing 20 hours of ministry a week, and I have to get a book written because we had negotiated a book deal. I wrote a book proposal, and it had to be like the biggest publisher in the world, a Christian publisher in the world. So I got it and I did it and we landed it and I negotiated the contract. All things I was probably not qualified to do at 22, but I did it. And I
Wow.
just was so afraid because I was like, I'm not sleeping. I don't know when I eat. Like I'm so tired and I still have to function. And some of the jobs, there's a ton of people, there's interns and extras and people not getting paid and people barely getting paid and everyone's working their butts off. But some of it is like stacking chairs, cleaning up, some of it. But I had to write, which actually required some intellect. Not
Right.
that what they weren't doing didn't require intelligence, but
Yeah.
I was exhausted and I remember feeling stuck. Like, I don't know how to do this because there's no way I can't work 8 a.m. to midnight.
Right.
Like I don't know. There's no way around it.
Right. Because it was an expectation that was watched very carefully, and if you didn't do it, there was a consequence for not doing it. Correct?
Yeah. And I felt pretty fortunate in that I had kind of finagled what I did nobody else could do, to be
Right.
honest. You got a
Right.
bunch of people that don't have degrees. I would tell you I'm a pretty decent writer. And so
You're a best-selling author, Lesley.
now
So yeah, I think we've already determined that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't I don't want to like protest too much because it sounds like then I probably did, but this moment, like today, and reconnecting with all of you 20 years later, something that I felt was a dream in my heart that I felt like got really stolen and just sort of ripped out and trampled on, that was redeemed this week has been pretty life-changing for
That's
me
awesome.
because yeah.
So let me just ask you a question about that. Similar experience, but could you talk just a minute about how that happens? How people like this woman sort of they're like your dream is a shark and they're a remora, right? And they latch onto that. And could you talk a little bit about what that process sort of feels like how she baits you and kind of grooms and nurtures that loyalty that's really based upon most people's dreams and passions, especially when they're when they're when they're artistic or creative, are more than just I want to be a lawyer, right? There's something that comes from inside you, in your heart. I mean, there's a deep motivation there. So could you talk a little bit about that dynamic and how that feels and how that works?
Yeah, I think when I was pretty open and vulnerable. I had spent enough time with her son, who honestly probably just got intel to go, here's all the right things to say. Here's why she'll come. For me, I know because I grew up in a pretty poor family, I had nothing to go back to in a small town. So it was easy for me to go, man, I don't have anything to go back to. And again, when you create an environment, she was on the front page of a well-known magazine. She was on a stage. There's a vortex of it's pseudo celebrity. So in my field, I don't want to get too nerdy, but there's something called a parasocial relationship where you can feel connected to someone who actually doesn't care about you, nor do they reciprocate anything friendship wise, but because of their status or because of their like a celebrity. And I would say a pseudo celebrity in this sort of culture, this bubble, that becomes a reward. Getting time with them becomes a reward. It's sort of basic supply and demand, right? She made herself in demand, right? Made supply scarce, and you just wanted to be a part of that. After I left and got out, I always feel like you're saying you got out of prison. But like after I got out and separated, I wrote a 100-page master's thesis trying to understand the human motivation. And here's what I know is that there are three primary motivations that cause us to want to be to serve a nonprofit, to help. I studied nonprofit organizations because I couldn't believe what I was willing to do. And I couldn't believe the people who would leave an accounting job to volunteer, who would give of their time to write skits, design graphics, do film and editing, who could have been really great. But she made all of us believe we were a part of something that was eternal, right? That it's so great that it's spiritual, that you get connected to. So I think,
And how dare you leave? If you even talk about wanting to leave,
well, and
I can't believe it. Not
yeah,
to
and
interrupt you, but
the first one that for 18 to 25-year-olds that pulls you in is something called egoistic. So that can look like two things. It can one look like it's cool to be a part of something cool, right?
Right.
And it can also look like a tangible skill. So if you were wanted to be a doctor, you'd go be a candy striper. That makes sense. If you want to be a teacher, you'd volunteer as a tutor. That makes sense. So for me personally, I thought this is like, she'll help me get into speaking or help me get into even writing. What great experience, right? She'll recommend me to other people. This will be a place I can get experience. And really, like, I can't even describe how little she invested in my future. Like, that was never discussed. It was never, it really was, I need you to get this done.
can I
for
say this
me.
can I ask you this? At the beginning,
Yeah.
was it discussed? Was that the hook she used?
I'm sure I said, like, I have a dream to be an author. I have a dream to be a speaker. Yeah. And
Right.
I mean, she would say over and over, my son says you're brilliant. My son says you're brilliant. And I was rewriting her other son's book at the time and
Right.
sending chapters.
So
And
she
I just
knew.
did it.
Yeah.
No questions asked. My friends were like, why are you spending all this time and I just said, I don't know. I think this is going to open up a door for me. I think it's going to be a good experience. I think if you wanted to go into ministry, you would tell yourself it looks really good to work for this person. If you want,
That's not a
you'd
lie.
want, you'd want them to open doors. You don't actually realize in any way what you're signing up for. The other tricky part, the reason we stay in those environments is, especially for 18 to 25-year-olds, is what they call altruistic motivation. It feels good to feel like you're helping. And you get connected to teenagers that you think your eternity is on, like their eternity is on you, and you're building relationships with them. That wasn't fake for me. Like, I loved Heather, Jessica, Dean, Evan. Like, I could go down a whole list. Katie, kids who I deeply cared about and I'm trying to build relationships with, but also couldn't get everything done. And one of my friends later, I was explaining, and he goes, "That's like a spiritual mafia." And I said, "It kind of is a little bit, but it's
Not a little bit.
the lure, I think, of the experience. I'll get tangible skills, and the trick is, and this is really, I think, what's important is I studied something called social exchange theory. It's really simple. You stay in a relationship when the rewards outweigh the costs. And
Yep.
and being a part of something cool has a high value to some people like me who wasn't cool, who grew up watching TV and on television, right? So that had a high value. To a rich kid, that wouldn't have had a high value. Does that make sense?
Right.
Like,
Yep.
they would go, that doesn't mean as much to me.
And I think that she was an expert on knowing exactly what the hook was, and what, like,
what
for
do you
you,
value?
it was specific to something. To me, it was specific to something. To Brian, it was specific to something. I mean, the list goes on. I can't even tell you how many emails I've gotten. I've said this every week, but hundreds of emails from kids, from people, now adults, that were used and abused by this person, not paid for work, all the stuff that you're talking about. And it's amazing that, and what you're saying, Lesley, is really good, because I think the question is, why did I do that? Like that's what
Yeah.
the questions are now with these adults saying, oh my gosh, Brian's even said it. Why did I stay that long?
Yeah.
Why did
Yeah.
I do this?
Well,
And you're
and
kind of answering that question for us.
yeah. I want to be clear. This is something I tell my students when we talk about public speaking anxiety, but the reason Maslow has a hierarchy of needs, right? It's really basic. And so this theory echoes it a little, but the need to belong, the need to what we call efficacy or esteem, to feel valued, to feel important, to feel like you matter, are so very powerful. And it's an American thing, but it is, our culture values celebrities. We value the stage, and people would give their kids college tuition to have lunch with Taylor Swift. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
But they would do it. And here's the truth. I think, and I hope anyone that is listening can recognize that you signed up for that because you are human, and you
Right.
stayed because you are human.
And you're a
Not
good
because
person.
you're an idiot,
Right.
not because
Right.
you're broken. It is how you were wired. Somebody hacked into your psychology,
Right.
and twisted it.
Wow.
I think that's a really important point, because I know myself, I struggled for a long time when I began to see things as they were, with a lot of self-condemnation, really kind of hating myself for allowing that to happen. And it wasn't until I realized some of the things that you were saying, at least to some extent, that I was really able to begin to look at myself in a much more holistic and I mean, friendlier way, more kind way. So I think that's really important to people who today are struggling with that.
Yeah.
We started.
So Lesley,
I was going to say, we started off with the idea of, it's not you, it's them, and that really is what you're talking about.
Yeah. And
So-
I think
Well, go ahead. Well, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and I want to end this part 1 and start up with part 2, because we're about out of time.
Oh,
But
yeah.
I want to get more into this, because I think there's people out there that are really struggling with that whole thing, that my talent, my ability, there's people that spent 10 years or more working with this person, thinking there was going to be a payoff in the end, and there was not. And in some of those situations, those people were cast to the side and made to feel, it's just weird, because today I just got an email, or I'm sorry, a Facebook message from a person who said that, they ran a cell group for her for years. And she said, I got this opportunity. I'm going to move to California. And when I told her, this person, that, she said, the blood of these kids are on your hands now. And then when she did leave, they made it look like she was a backslidden Christian now, because she wasn't drinking their Kool-Aid, right? She wasn't doing what they wanted to do in their ministry. And so I think I honestly think there's hundreds of people out there, not just from the person we've experiencing, but other groups that have put guilt trips on people for not working hard in their ministry. And so I would really like to speak to that towards the end. The name of the book is Groomed.Connect. I'd love for you to buy that. The notes will be in the comments, will be ways to get that. We're also going to put Lesley's book and the way you can get that book. She's selling her book cheap, even though it's a best-selling book. I feel bad now. Hers is 99 cents. Mine is $10, but hey, I have to feed my kids. No, actually,
can I plug your book? Can I say what?
Yes.
I've been doing? Okay, so I'm sending this link to people who I worked with in those seasons. So if you're listening to this, because you said, like, I was a part of that in Nebraska or in Illinois or in wherever, Georgia, to a friend you haven't talked to in a long time who was also in it, send them the link and say, could you read this? Would you read this? And then can we talk? It's been really powerful for many of the people that I worked with. And it's allowed them the ability to open up and say, man, I wanted to say something and it was not okay. And I didn't know if it was okay to speak up. And some of them are saying, like, I'm still not okay. Yeah. And we just want everybody to experience hope and healing on the other side.
So this second half of this, that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about hope and healing and some things like what you've done, Lesley, even yourself too. This has been a big week for you. And so just see some of that healing,
Yeah.
that's part of what
Yeah.
God's doing probably. So that's awesome. So thank you guys so much. This is part one of talking with Lesley Butcher. She's a college professor and a best-selling author. And so we're really privileged to have her on. We'll see you guys on part two. See you later.